Okay, folks, so for this screencast, I'm going to teach you about input arguments. So if you have your first compile here with just like a hello world in here, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to do this from command line cp first compile to input.cpp, and then that'll pop up in the folder manager, and so now I've got input cpp. And so what I'm going to do is, in this int main function, I'm going to type in int argc, and then char star star argv. And so argc is the number of input arguments, and then argv is the value of the input arguments. So what I can do is I can actually say printf the number of input arguments equals, and then I'm going to do %d. %d stands for integer, or sorry, I don't actually know what d stands for, but it's what you use to print an integer. And then I'm going to type in argc here. And so I'm going to go ahead and kill this hello world from before. And so if I go here and I do g++, and now input.cpp to -o input, and then I do /input, it's going to say that the number of input part arguments is 1. And then the input arguments is basically what you put after this. So if I do /input, say hello, it'll tell me that there's 2 input arguments now. The first is /input, and the second is hello. To actually see what they are, if I run a for loop, int idx equals 0, so it's going to start at 0, idx to argc, so it's going to stop at argc, idx++, so it's going to loop until I run out of input arguments. And I type in printf the input argument %d, so that's integer, equals %s, so that's string, /n for a new line. And then I'm going to type in idx, that's the integer, that's the number of the for loop. And then argv now, and then I'm going to do, since argv is a char star star, so this is a pointer to a vector. So argv is a string of input arguments, and then it's a vector, and so I can do the brackets to denote what value in the vector I want. And so I'm going to do idx here. And so that is basically going to say in the loop, grab the idx element of the input arguments. So now if I hit the up arrow a couple times and compile again, and then run /input, it's going to say the number of input arguments is 1, the input argument 0 is /input. And so then I can say hello, and now it's going to say 2 input arguments. The first one is /input, the second one is hello. I can do hello world, and now it'll say 3 input arguments, input hello world. And so what I could do, you can do some interesting things, like say you want to add 2 numbers. So what you can do is you could say first number, and you have to declare it as an integer first number equals, and I'm going to use a built-in function called a to I of argv1. So that's going to take the first input argument and convert it to a string, or sorry, an integer, and then int second number is a to I argv of 2. And then I'm going to say int, what's the multiplication? So I'll say multiply is first number times second number. And then what I can say is printf %d times %d is equal to %d, and then /n. So then I can do first number, second number, and multiply. Okay, and so I'm going to go down here and hit the input arrow, hit this twice, and then I'm going to say 1 and I'll say 10 and 24. And there you go. Input argument 1 is 10, input argument 2 is 24, 10 times 24 is 240. So it actually did it correctly, it converted everything properly. Where you can run into trouble is if you give it the wrong number of input arguments, and it's going to throw a seg fault because it's trying to find a number that doesn't exist. So what you actually need to do is you need to say, hey, if argc is greater than, in this case, 3, or sorry, greater than or equal to 3, you know, do everything that I defined here. And I'm going to, oh, do I have like the insert? Oh, okay, there we go. I had I had the wrong key pressed. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw an else in here and say printf, sorry, you did not supply the correct number of input arguments, /n. Okay, so now if I compile, it's going to say sorry, but if you type in 32, it's going to say, it'll actually run the code. And so basically it's like built-in error checking to check and make sure that you have the right number of input arguments. Otherwise it won't actually run the code. Alright, I think I've exhausted this video here, and I hope you learned a lot. Happy coding.